Simon, a row is breaking out this lunchtime. You probably saw this. It's been covered in the media this morning.
Yep.
Aston Villa have banned their players from taking part in fantasy football competitions. And this is amid concern about the leaking of Jack Grealish's injury. Grealish, of course, as you know, didn't feature. There was some surprise when he didn't feature at the weekend against Leicester. So players can take part in this fantasy football and do so in numbers. And we know that, and that's all above board. Now, an hour before the first round of Premier League matches actually takes place, so this was Friday night when Wolves play Leeds, you are then able to view anyone's fantasy football team. And of course, as I say, players of certain clubs are playing fantasy football and are quite at liberty to do so. But then suspicion has been raised because teams chosen by some of the Villa players, it was noticed, had taken Grealish out of the Aston Villa team that was due to play on the Saturday against Leicester. Hence, there are allegations of, was this in some way constituting insider trading? Trading. What's your take on that? Because I think there is a degree of nervousness this lunchtime about how this has got out.
It's universally accepted, whether it right or wrong, that players have friends in other clubs and they talk amongst themselves. So it's not necessarily a given that the scenario that involved quote unquote insider trading, it simply can be loose lips sink ships sort of mentality. I think really where you are in this is that anything that involves other people being disadvantaged by the nature of information that people may be privy to should be something that should be excluded. And that then moves into the territory of, is it really now appropriate, like it or not, for professional footballers to be anywhere near gambling or anywhere near such things as fantasy football that have jeopardy involved, that have people's engagement, that has financial recompense involved in it, and so on and so forth. Now, I know that when you go into the business of football, whether it's as a chairman or a player, you don't put your right to do things in life to one side. But there's also an element of concession that you have to make, that if indeed you bring the situation that you're involved in into disrepute, whether Kieran Trippier in the betting things thinks he was innocent of something, it brings ambiguity and brings it into disrepute. Whether these guys that were involved in the fantasy football, the players themselves, and there's a few that have been alleged to have been involved in it, have no real intentions and they weren't really privy to things that they shouldn't have been, the fact that people can allege it, there becomes the issue.
Suspicion.
Yeah, and it brings something in. It brings the game into an element of disrepute. It brings the idea that if you're in this situation, you've got to be beyond reproach. And if you can't be beyond reproach, then you possibly have no business being there. And I know that they're young boys and they want to play fantasy football. And part of the attraction may be to the fantasy football providers that they've got professional footballers doing it as well.
Right.
But unfortunately, out comes this sort of stuff. Regularly at times in football, other teams will know other teams' business because XYZ player in one dressing room is a mate of another player in another dressing room.
It's known.
It just goes on.
It's known.
It doesn't make it right, but it's just a fact of life. Like tapping up goes on and people want to eliminate it, but it exists.
Well, Villa have made some moves on this one. I mean, a club insider is saying this lunchtime, a number of the younger players have fantasy Premier League sides and have been told in no uncertain terms not to continue to play them due to the potential insider knowledge element.
Yeah, and that's smart from Villa.
Should it be a blanket ban?
Well, yeah.
On all clubs?
I don't want to use the term ban because, it's like when someone changes their mind, we have to use the narrative. It's a U-turn. It's called thinking sensibly. Okay, whenever you try and do something in life, whether it's a marketing campaign in business or a relationship, you should always try and think where it breaks. And then you can put the resistance in there to avoid something breaking. Perhaps we should have said, now, given what they now realise, which is actually this could be open to abuse, this could be open to misrepresentation, it could be open to bringing people into challenging situations, we best take them out of the loop. Rather than say ban, let's just suggest, as a matter of course, as a club policy, across the pantheon of football players can't compete in fantasy football. I know it's not ideal, and I know they don't hang up their right for free speech or whatever else.
That's a virtual ban, Simon. You're saying to them you can't do it.
It's just simply suggesting that fantasy football is not for professional footballers, given the fact that at times they will have intellectual capital that others won't have.
Yes, and it's likely to compromise squad secrecy.
Well, it's likely
further down the line.
It's likely to compromise the integrity of fantasy football, insofar as fantasy football is an important concept.
Yeah.
It is an important concept because it exists and people value it. And so if it's got any breaches in it, they should be marginalised, minimised, and ideally eliminated. And if one of them is take professional footballers out of the mix, as draconian as that may be, then we won't have to read this. And we won't have to have people quaking in their boots about what they may or may not have done.
Well, that's right, because if you were Christian Purslow on Saturday, you'd be annoyed that the news of Grealish had get out.
Yeah, it's not necessary. And ultimately, you can't control the hearts and minds and the thoughts of every single player, but you can take it away from them. If they do it then you've got a different dynamic with them.